Susan Masino. She's a major rock and roll fan, and her love for the music and her friendships with the band, kind of made it a natural for her to write great books about rock and roll and the music that she loves, the bands that she knows. She's the author of several books, including Rock and Roll Fantasy and AC/DC, Let There Be Rock, and others. This song is growing on me from the latest AC/DC. Family tradition, 3 generations of Hank Williams, and her latest, this is my favorite, it's a great one, AC/DC FAQ. All that's left to know about the world's true rock and roll band. It is great to have you back on the show, Susan.
Thank you, Allan. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. It's funny, we've talked about AC/DC before, but as I go through your book and read the stories, you and I share a lot of similar contact with the band for different reasons, but they parallel the same time period back when Bond was there. And just a great book, very well done, and I appreciate you getting into those detailed stories. Let's talk about how you met the band and got to have that relationship.
Well, I was very lucky for one thing. I'm grateful every day for the fact that I got to meet them when I did, because I had just started writing for a local paper here in Madison, Wisconsin, and I was literally driving by the office the day that Elvis died on August 16th, 1977. And something told me my little intuition told me to stop in and see if I could get another, job, some review. I was reviewing bands when they gave me something.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I was really trying to get my foot in the door. And I walked in just as one of the editors was hanging up the phone, and I asked him if there was anything that I could help out with, and he said that there was a band downtown that night, and the promoter needed a gopher, somebody to run errands, and just be back up a little bit, and there was no pay involved, and I didn't care about any of that. I just wanted to, get another assignment. So I jumped on it right away. I said, "Oh yeah, what time do they need me?" And I'll be right down there. And as I was leaving, I walked out the door. I turned around and I asked him, what's the band? Who is it? And he just shook his head. He says, "Oh, I don't know, some band out of Australia named AC/DC." And I didn't think anything of it because I'd never heard of them. And I never heard any music on the radio or anything. So
what year was this again?
It was August 16th, 1977.
Okay, go ahead.
And it was their first, I found out later, it was their first time in the United States, and they had just gotten into the United States at the end of July, like mid to end of July. So they had just gotten to the States, and we were the 15th date on their tour here in Madison, Wisconsin, and they were booked to play at the Stone Hearth, which was this little bar down off of the campus in downtown Madison. And so I went down there and got told to, run out and buy some Blue Nun wine for the singer because the band was out eating dinner, and their 3-man road crew were setting up. And it was very low key. It didn't look like they had, an entourage or anything like that. So I went down and got some wine and brought it back to the bar. And what was funny, as soon as I brought back a bottle of wine, the promoter turned around, or one of the guys from the promotion company turned around and said, "A second one." So I had to run out and get a second bottle. And I just hung out, and they were gone for a while, so I had time to kind of sit and relax, and I was listening to the road crew, and the road crew was actually kind of, ripping on the United States. They had just gotten there, and certain things they didn't care for.
And what was the album at the time that they were promoting?
Let There Be Rock.
Let There Be Rock. Okay, that's what I thought. Go ahead.
Yeah, and, so I was listening to them kind of talk about the States and what they didn't like about it at that point, and I got a little closer to one of the guys that he looked the youngest, and he had really long hair, and I kind of leaned over and tapped him on the shoulder, and he turned around, and I said, the airport's not that far away. I could always give you a lift. And he turned and looked at me, and he's like, "Who are you?"
Mm-hmm.
And I said, "I'm sorry, who are you?" And we just kind of started to talk, and his name was Barry Taylor, and it was his first time out of he was from England, and it was his first tour, and we just struck up a friendship that night. We talked a lot during the evening on and off and everything. And at the end of the night, he asked me for my phone, my phone number and my address. That's what it was. He wanted my number and my address, and he said he would keep in touch, which I didn't believe. I really thought, sure, I'll never hear from this guy again. And he ended up calling and writing me for the next every week for the next 3 years. And we're still friends to this day. And he is now a minister in Los Angeles.
Isn't that interesting? It's such a family atmosphere, and it's easy to have long-term relationships because most of their people stay with them all the time. I mean, for year after year, tour after tour. I actually back in when Whole Lotta Rosie came out as a 45, I was just blown away. And I believe that was If You Want Blood. Was that from that album? I think that was when that song actually was pressed on a 45. I couldn't believe it at the radio station. And I was instantly, when I heard that Whole Lotta Rosie, instantly a AC/DC fan. And I got an interview with Pat Travers during the Highway to Hell tour. And the interview, he was opening for AC/DC. Anyway, he was... nice guy, but he was drunk. Actually, it was probably, somebody told me he was taking Quaaludes. Very talented guy, and he was trying his best to conduct the interview, but it was just a waste of time. And meanwhile, AC/DC's on stage. I could hear it in the background, and I said, well, I got to get out of this conversation. Let's end that. I want to get in there. And I didn't even have backstage passes or anything. So when I finally got done with the conversation, which actually, going back and listening to it's some really funny stuff with Pat Travers. So I go back in there, and I'm with a buddy. I bring my equipment. We go in the backstage area and just kind of walk in because we didn't have passes. And one of the roadies said, "Okay, come on up. You can come on up." He saw me sweating and everything. And next thing I know, I'm backstage. I'm with the roadies. They're letting me in there, and they're inside. After this was about 5 minutes after the show when I finally got in there. There was the bands, everyone. They were all there. And I didn't know much about the band either, other than that song.
Right.
And so I introduced myself, and they were the nicest people, just like with you. Yeah, come on in. Hey, yeah. And then when I asked Angus for an interview, he said, "No, go ahead in there, man." You could just point it into another room. And there was Bon, and he had about 4 women around him, and he had a joint in one hand and a bottle of Jack in the other. And he says, and he come on in, man. So I brought my equipment, and we did the interview.
Oh, God, how cool is that?
Oh, man, I just let it fly, and it was great. It's kind of a classic. We repeat that. Anyway, friends with the band ever since, just like you, and you keep in touch in every tour. So this book that you just put out, what an appropriate book. I mean, it gives you so much information. AC/DC FAQ. So let's talk about some interesting stories that people might not know. The Highway to Hell cover, was there a controversy with the cover originally from the record company, what they wanted?
Oh, yeah. The record company did not want to call the album Highway to Hell. They had a problem with that in the first place. They were, I don't want to say fighting, but they were negotiating over that. And then they actually did a photo shoot that you can look up because there are other pictures from that shoot. They were supposed to have on the cover of that album a picture of the band riding in the back seat of a car and the devil behind the wheel looking in the rearview mirror at the band sitting in the back seat. That was the original concept. And, of course, it didn't make the album cover, and what was really surprising when I, actually saw the album itself is that, and it must have been very last minute because they didn't go out and, do another photo shoot. They took a previously released glossy of the band, a promotional glossy, and put that on the cover of the album, and they superimposed tails and, or tail and horns on Angus. And that was the first time that they ever portrayed Angus as the little devil. Was the cover of the Highway to Hell album.
It was interesting. And I'm glad you kind of cleared the air on this, because the story about Highway to Hell is because of a reference to It's Hell on the Road with a lead singer in his dirty socks for 3 days at a time or whatever. Angus was referring to being on the road, but yet Highway to Hell has been interpreted, especially those preachers in the 80s, as being a song, actually an album to get people to go to the devil.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. They took a lot of flack for that album.
I had a person call in. It's the one time I lost it as far as anger on the air. This guy calls in because he hears me defending the band against these stupid allegations on my show, and he calls in and says, "No, I was there, Allan, and I saw Brian Johnson after the end of the show calling people up on stage if they want to worship the devil, if they wanted to meet." And I'm hearing this complete lies. Not only was I at the concert, when your concert's over, the band doesn't invite people to go on stage. It was such a lie, and this is the kind of stuff they were believing, and I just let the guy have it. He held to his ground. He said, "No, you're wrong. Sorry, Allan." And I saw it. Oh, it was awful.
Oh my gosh! Yeah,
unbelievable.
Yeah, they took a lot of flack from everybody. The record company and the press, and especially the Bible Belt of the United States. They had a lot. They were given a lot of problems, and it was just so funny because as you said, it was just Angus's comment about being on tour forever. I mean, the first 4 years probably after they had come to the States the first time, they were on tour or in the studio nonstop.
Yep.
They were never actually. When I did the Let There Be Rock book, I broke their history down a week at a time to make sure that I covered everything, and it took me literally 7 years of their history before I found a break longer than 2 weeks.
That sounds right. Hardworking, and the other misconception is because of the wildness of Angus on stage is, he's got to be high. Oh, he's got to be screwed up. I mean, those kind of things irritates me because both of us know he barely even drinks. He doesn't, let alone smoke pot or anything. He's a teetotaler. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, he's very, very, very straight and very soft-spoken. And it's, when he gets out on stage, I mean, he lets it go, but it has nothing to do with being fueled by anything but pure adrenaline. I mean, he loves being up on stage, and he always, likes to say that once he puts that suit on.
What a great guy.
Yeah, he loves it. He loves to perform.
Yeah, all these guys, the entire band, just really, we're going to talk about each member, but just great people. The interesting thing in the early days, along with the misconceptions, is some people put them in the punk category. I think because maybe somebody from the Sex Pistols said it was Bon Scott inspired them. Yeah, well, and they were, I mean, I think because of the level of energy that they played at the time, you had the Ramones coming out, and you had the Sex Pistols, and they did kind of get grouped into that punk thing. But when they went to England for the first time, and the Sex Pistols got to see AC/DC, I think it was Angus claimed that the next time they saw the Sex Pistols, they were dressing like Bon. They had cut off the arms to their jackets and stuff, and
started to dress a little bit like Bond, which they thought was really funny. They really got a big kick out of that.
When you listen to not Highway to Hell, but that's another story. But a Whole Lot of Rosie, boy, did that have energy. If that couldn't get you out of a bad mood and get you moving, nothing could.
Oh yeah. Well, I think every song that they play is like that. It brings so much joy, and there's so much energy behind it that you can't sit still. I don't know how anybody can sit still and listen to them.
Rock or Bust, I love it. I love the album. Their last album, Black Ice, that did really great. Let's talk about some of their later albums and the success of AC/DC in 2015 and beyond.
Oh my gosh! Yeah.
Where do you start? Right.
I know. I mean, their whole catalog of music is astounding. And the fact that, they've been together now for over 40 years is also amazing. And that they're out right now, I hear they're ripping up Europe one country at a time. So.
I know. And it's interesting. I guess, were they putting off most of the dates in the U.S. till next year? Is that what it looks like?
I think it does. I mean, they do have some dates, at the end of the summer. They come back in August, and they're playing through... until, about November or December.
Exactly.
They always play, down in Australia over the holidays. And I'm really hoping that, after the holiday break, that the United States gets some more dates.
Absolutely. Oh, I'm sure they will. There's no way. I'm always afraid they're going to exhaust themselves because they are such road warriors. They stay on tour for such a long time, and I'm always worried about Brian's voice.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes when you talk to him over the years, he's had some issue with his voice he was dealing with, trying to, get ready for the show, and he was hoarse. Talk about that.
Oh, I don't know how he does it every night. I really don't. I mean, he puts, 1,000% into it, and I worry about the same thing, about Angus himself, too, how he, runs around and throws himself around, and it's miraculous. And as you said, once they get up and start touring, they tend to tour up to, I think, the Black Ice tour. My gosh, that went on for 2 years.
Yeah. And Angus works so hard on stage. If you haven't seen AC/DC, doesn't matter how many concerts you've seen, they will blow you away. And when you watch Angus and the energy he puts into this and on the floor and rolling around, oh, God, what a show. Blew me away. Every time I go to an AC/DC show, I can't. In fact, just now I'm getting goosebumps because it's no way you really can put it into words. And I've seen so many concerts as you have. What is it about that band?
Yeah, it is the pure energy, and I thought that, like, the first night that I saw them at that club in Madison, they were playing, it's really unbelievable to think about back in 77 to us that we hadn't really heard much of them. They had a little bit of airplay with Let There Be Rock, but not a lot.
Right.
But the night that I saw them, they played Live Wire. Hell Ain't a Bad Place to Be.
Right.
Whole Lot of Rosie, Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap, High Voltage. And at the level of energy was what completely, blew me up against the wall. I could not believe it.
Unbelievable.
I'd seen a lot of bands. I used to go see a band almost every week when I was in high school and stuff, and I saw, Deep Purple, The Who, Black Sabbath, Pink Floyd. I'd seen a lot of bands up to that point, and when I saw AC/DC, I had never seen anything like that before.
Absolutely. It is so true. And that power, in addition to all the members of the band, but Malcolm and that constant rhythm that makes their music almost danceable, metal that you can move to.
Oh, yeah,
And that powerful, Malcolm. God, it's a sad story. We'll talk about Malcolm Young and what happened and when did people start noticing this?
Yeah, I've listened to some of the interviews now that Angus has given, and he said that they started noticing things when they were on the Black Ice Tour,
Mm-hmm.
which I saw them 4 times on the Black Ice Tour. And it's so hard to talk about, but the first time that I saw them was November 1st, 2008. It was like the 3rd night of the tour, and they were here in Chicago, not too far from where I live. And so that was the night that my son got to meet them, and we hung out with them, and we got, that picture is in the book. It's a great picture, and Malcolm was like he had always been. I mean, so, we would go, and I'm sure you experience this too, we would go like 6-7 years without even talking or seeing each other, and then as soon as, we see each other, we start talking like it was last week.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean, Susan. Yeah, one of the tours where they did a live radio interview from the Hard Rock Cafe in New York City, and I remember at that point it was maybe almost a decade since I talked to Malcolm or even had any contact with him, and not the manager, but I forgot their business manager. Anyway, he comes up to me and he says, Allan, as we were driving here in the limousine, he said, "Hey, is that Handelman radio guy from North Carolina here?" And that meant the world to me.
Sure.
Because that's part of the deal. Not only was I a fan, but these guys were just great people you'd easily want to be friends with.
Oh, yeah, and they remember, like they remembered you, and they
absolutely
kept remembering me. And
now, so he was starting to have some symptoms during the Black Ice Tour, they say?
Yeah, that's what Angus has said, is that as they got into the tour, he, described Malcolm as being, very organized, and of course, we know that, Malcolm was the boss. I mean, he made all the decisions, and he noticed, Angus noticed that Malcolm was becoming a little unorganized and not, a little bit confused when they would, go from one city to another, and it was just little things that were coming up. And I remember I saw them in November of 2008. The next time I saw them, I believe, was August of 2009. And I did go backstage and I did hang out, and I did talk to both Angus and Malcolm, but Malcolm was more quiet. And I kind of thought he was probably tired, and there were other people around, so he wasn't quite as chatty as he usually is. But when I think back now, I just thought to myself, he's got to be tired. My God,
Mm-hmm.
They've been on the road for over a year now. But now I can kind of, compare the 2 visits
Mm-hmm.
and see that, he wasn't quite himself that night.
The last time I talked to him, the last time I interviewed him was when they were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. What was that, 2002, 2003, I believe?
Yeah, 2003.
2003, and I was in New York, and I had the whole band on, and he came into my hotel room where I had my little portable studio, and he gave a great interview, and I mean, we got into all kinds of stuff. And one of the things he said was, and I think this was off the air, is now that his kids are almost grown, he was thinking about coming to this country and moving here. And he didn't want to do that and take them out of school when they were younger.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember we exchanged email addresses, which he wrote with a magic marker, and to this day I can't decipher it. I don't know, but it was a great conversation. But I did detect just a slight tinge of not knowing what was going on as far as this is probably not uncommon with bands, but where they're going next, where they're going to be tomorrow, this kind of thing. But I don't know if that was early signs of what he's going through. But why did it got so bad that they had to ask him to leave the band? Man, that happened fast.
Well, I thought the same too about, this was so sudden, it seemed to us, because nobody knew about it. But once they, they revealed that he was, stepping down from the band back in April of, 2000, I want to say 14.
Yeah, that's about right, yeah.
Yeah, 2014 in April. And, they said that he was stepping down, but then once more of their, they started revealing what really happened, and after the Black Ice Tour, not only did Malcolm fight with lung cancer, but he was also fitted with a pacemaker.
Oh, wow.
And I had no idea. I mean, I knew somebody in the band was having health problems, but my intuition, I literally knew it was Malcolm, but there was no confirmation on that until, in the last year. But he went through a lot of health problems after the tour ended.
He did have a drinking problem years earlier and had to leave the band briefly.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Just briefly, though. He wasn't gone for very long, and it's amazing that he did what he did and came back and, was sober and went on for, another 25 years or something after that and did so well. But the fact that now that he battles dementia and he, Angus even said in an interview recently that he doesn't Malcolm doesn't recognize their own music anymore.
Oh, man. Oh, man.
That's
it's by the way, we're talking to Susan Masino about her latest book, AC/DC FAQ. All that's left to know about the world's true rock and roll band. And you can go to her website, susanmasino.com. And so, I remember talking to Brian, and truly, I guess he didn't. No, this was, I'm confusing two major stories in the last year or so about AC/DC and the tragic news about Malcolm. But then the other big news is what was happening to Phil.
Yeah, I know.
And I think that took, I know, Brian by surprise. What is the latest on that?
Well, the last that I have read over the news is that, he went to court. He pleaded guilty to the charges of attempted murder, which is or trying to procure.
Get somebody.
A murder, yeah.
Right.
And I have no idea what the sentencing is going to be. But
I thought those charges were dropped, and then I guess they charged him again, huh? So
I thought they were dropped too, and no, that he went into court for that just recently in the last couple of weeks, and I don't know what the outcome is going to be, but obviously, he can't leave the country and travel while he's going through this, and he lives down in New Zealand, but again, they found marijuana and meth in his house when they came to arrest him. And if he was doing anything like, meth, methamphetamine, that, how destructive that is. I mean, it's a horrible drug.
Yeah, it's almost, it is really, you can't, putting it, that's like so many people do. They put marijuana in the same category of that. Having marijuana is no big deal at all. The meth part, that's a problem.
Yeah, absolutely. And by his actions and what he's been doing, it's such a tragedy because, Phil had problems back in the 80s, and that was the reason why he left the band back in 1983. And he went on to become, he recovered. He started his own, helicopter company, and he started his own recording studio down in New Zealand, and he did so good for so many years, and that's why he came back into the band.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And, in all the times from the time he came back on the Ball Breaker tour of, I think in 95 is when he came back. And he, I had seen him backstage several times, and he was, like Phil. He was his old self, and it was great to see. I mean, it was so exciting that after, 13 years of being out of the band, he came back into the band, and he was doing so well.
Yeah. He was the quiet one. He didn't want to do any interviews, but I did get him to talk and open up just a little bit during the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction, and seemed a little shy, uncomfortable doing interviews, but yeah, he was a great guy, and I hope it all works out. He did get together. By the way, the new album, he's on the new album, so I guess all these problems happened right after they finished recording Rock or Bust.
Yes, that's right.
Now, touring without Malcolm and touring without Phil, give us the latest lineup and who's filling the gaps?
Well, when Malcolm left to quit drinking back in the end of the Blow Up Your Video tour, I want to say it was probably the fall of 1983, he had his nephew Stevie Young play for him. And Stevie is the son of Steve Young, one of the older brothers, but he's pretty much around the same age as Malcolm and Angus. They kind of grew up together. So Stevie played for Malcolm and did a great job. He looked so much like Malcolm on stage at the time that some fans didn't even realize that Malcolm wasn't on stage, which is amazing to think about because, of course, you and I would notice that right away, but some people didn't, and that is who stepped in for him now. He played on the new album, and he's on tour with them. And then for the drums, they called back Chris Slade that played on the Razor's Edge tour,
right? And
he was on the album also. So they called Chris Slade back to play drums, and then that's who's out on tour with them now.
Reading the book brought back one conversation. One thing that Malcolm mentioned to me was when he was coming up with the riff for Back in Black, he lost his cassette and then found it again, and he told this great story, and I forgot all about it. You talk about that because we almost lost that amazing riff. I
know. They used to, when they were on the road, they put their stuff on cassette tapes at the time, and it's really funny. I think Angus said it too, that it almost got recorded over because, and this is so hard to believe, but when they were on tour, when they were out on the road, sometimes cassette tapes were hard to get.
Right.
They have no idea why, but they would, put stuff down, and then sometimes they would record right over the top of whatever they had on there, and that's almost what happened to the riff to Back in Black.
And he just kind of found it by accident? Is that what happened? I can't remember the punchline.
I think so. I think they were just, going through tapes to use.
Yeah.
And they found it, and they were like, oh yeah, yeah. This is something we wanted to use. Yeah, absolutely. We're going to dig up some of those interviews that I'm referring to that I did and kind of refresh my memory. Susan Masino is with us. We're talking about AC/DC. If you're an AC/DC fan, you're going to love this book. If you're not an AC/DC fan and you just like rock and roll, you're still going to love this book because, boy, what a chunk of history. They're still among the top 2 or 3 highest grossing bands in the entire world. I mean, yes. Right? What those stats are amazing. Oh, I know. Yeah, they're in the top 5, and their album Back in Black is in the top 10 biggest selling albums in history.
In the history of music. Your favorite album, if you had to pick one, did you say it was Powerage?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's a great one. I guess for me, it would have to be probably Highway to Hell, because that was the pivotal album that I felt that I succeeded because finally radio stations were playing the music, and I was like, this is the breakthrough album for me.
Oh, yeah.
But God, I love all their stuff. What is it about Powerage?
Well, there's a few things. For one, when I did an interview with them at the end of, they came here in August, and they played in 77. They went over to, I believe, England just for a little bit, or over in Europe. They went over to, Finland and a couple of countries like that. And then they came back over here in December of 1977. And I got to sit down with all 5 of them, and we did, I call it an interview, but it's transcribed in the book, and as you can read, it was a bit of a crazy interview. And when I got done with it and it got printed, that by then they were already down in Australia getting ready to record that album. And I sent copies of the newspaper down there so they could read the article. And through Barry, Barry was writing me, and Barry Taylor, their roadie, was calling and writing me. And so I was in contact with them the whole time that they were recording Powerage. And the funniest thing was that Barry told me, he was very shy, very sweet kind of a guy. He said to me, I got to help on with some of the lyrics. And I didn't really think anything of it at all. I was just like, oh, that's really nice, and he mentioned it a couple of times after that, I help on with some of the lyrics, and it took me, this is so sad, it took me years later to realize that Bon used the name Susie in Down Payment Blues.
Yeah, that connection. Wow, yeah, that says a lot.
Yeah, and I know Bon liked to tease Barry about his affection for me, and they would razz him and stuff. And at one time actually they sat down for a meeting with Michael Browning, their manager at the time.
Yeah, right. I remember that name. Yeah.
Yeah, and they were set to plan out the new tour. And I guess Michael looked over at Barry and said, well, we know we have to make a stop in Wisconsin.
Ah, that's you. That's you.
So that I have a very soft spot in my heart, although I love the songs, Gone Shootin' and I mean, everything. Sin City, I mean, there are some great songs on that album.
Great songs on that album. If you're just tuning in, we're talking to Susan Masino, AC/DC FAQ, the new book. All that's left to know about the world's true rock and roll band. And that is, I like that title because you're right, true rock and roll band. It is all about the fans and the music. It's rock and roll. They have several rock and roll anthems, in my opinion. They sing about the love of rock and roll. It doesn't matter that they're in their 60s. That love of rock and roll continues. That is their mission statement. One of the reasons, I feel you have that same mission statement. So do I. I make my career still trying the best I can in these days to serve that rock culture that still, in my mind, exists.
Oh, yes. Yeah. I mean, rock and roll, they said it wouldn't last.
Well, it's a little different today, and there's different kinds of music, and I don't know if there's that real culture that tunes to, the radio stations like they used to. And I think everything's kind of fragmented today, so the generation is kind of spread out. Who's to say what people are into? But isn't it interesting that AC/DC is one of just a handful of bands from that time period that's still relevant with new rock radio stations? They still will play AC/DC mixed in with new rock. How many classic bands put out new stuff and they never get airplay, let alone on a new rock station? Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, they've transcended everything, and I think it's because their music is so true. It's so genuine, and it's, blues-based, and it, goes back to, you can hear the Chuck Berry in there, and the Jerry Lee Lewis and the Little Richard type
Absolutely.
Stuff. You can still hear that in the way that they write and play their music. And that was all Malcolm, He used to say, if it doesn't swing, we don't do it.
Yeah. Let's talk about another great guy, Cliff Williams, who has a house here in North Carolina. He's a great guy. And he, at one time, was homeless, huh?
Yeah. Back in the days, when he was, he grew up in Liverpool, England, and when he was out on his own and in between bands, at one point he didn't have a place to stay, and that's so amazing to think of, the success that he has now. But yeah, he was homeless at one time.
It's amazing. Again, going back to the induction of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, they had in 2003. Cliff introduced me to his family and his daughter, who was just going into college, and she was going to broadcast, or she was going to major in broadcasting, radio broadcasting. And I'm looking at him. I see this rock and roll star because, just because we do shows or write books in your case, I'm still the fan. I'm still like in awe of these guys. And I'm looking at his daughter, who's an adult, and he still looks like pretty much he always looked like. It was just so profound how many years have gone by. And the great music these guys produce is just amazing. So Mal, he's doing well. Talk a little bit about who's become a real buddy for both of us, and that's Brian Johnson. Man, they couldn't have picked a better person to replace Bon, huh?
Oh my gosh, I truly believe that was his sole purpose on this earth, was to replace Bon Scott, because he's such a good fit, and he's so much like Bon. Since, you got to meet Bon and a lot of people didn't, Brian, to me, reminds me of Bon in so many ways. I mean, always funny, always trying to make people laugh,
Absolutely.
Extremely kind
Yes.
and polite to everybody he meets. And he's an incredible guy. And, he too was, not doing well when AC/DC gave him that call. He was, he had his own car business where he put vinyl roofs on cars over in England where he lived, and he wasn't making a lot of money. And to see what he's done in the last 35 years of being in the band, he's a race car driver, serious race car driver.
Oh, I know. He's here in Charlotte quite often. He's passionate about it.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and he does so many things. He's written operas, he's produced bands, he races cars, he loves gourmet food, he's into that. He's made his time, I think he's used his time really wisely as far as like enjoying life, to the fullest in a good way. I mean, he'll definitely have a beer or two.
Oh, sure. Oh, yeah. And he is, again, not just a nice guy, but a really nice guy. I mean, so personable and so just down to earth. It's as if he wasn't a rock star at all. It was just pretty amazing. Pretty amazing. He did share a paranormal experience. The whole band kind of experienced a few paranormal things. And in fact, when Malcolm and I, back in this was probably throughout the 80s and into the 90s, whenever we got together, we would talk, and even on my show sometimes by phone, we would talk about UFOs and his interest in UFOs. He's fascinated. But then again, he was very conscious of, wow, I don't want people to think I'm crazy, so I don't want to say this on the air. But
right.
And at the same time, I remember a great story, and this is kind of, I see you relating to this because I understand you've had some paranormal experiences. But he talked about Bon's presence being on stage with him. The whole band felt his presence when they started the tour. And I got to, they gave me an exclusive interview, Brian's very first interview in America during the Back in Black tour, and I was at one of the opening shows, and oh God, they brought me on stage. It was I was just in awe, and I heard that bell, and I still kind of go back, and again, I'm that fan, but they experienced feeling the presence of Bon even during the recording of the album. Do you have information on that? Did you talk to him about that? Oh yeah. It's funny because that's one thing that we all have in common is when you see them and no matter what night it is or what year it is or what tour it is, Bon is one of the first people that we talk about. They always talk about Bon. Yes.
They love to talk about him. And they still miss him so much. And everybody, I interviewed Angus, and that is also in the book, on the Black Ice tour. We did a phone interview after they were out on the road. And, he talks about feeling Bon all the time. That,
Absolutely.
He's on stage with them and, he made a joke about, wondering if he kind of starts like he thinks he walks like Bon. He tries to get his swagger, and they feel him all the time. And Brian has mentioned, and again, as you know, I don't know if he's gone into a lot of detail in other places because he doesn't, like to talk about it a lot because, they don't want people to think, wow, these guys are,
Sure.
Yeah, they're crazy, but Brian tells a story about when they finally, went down to the Bahamas to record Back in Black, and he was woken up in the middle of the night, out of a deep sleep, just sat straight up in bed, and he grabbed, a notebook and a pen and just wrote lyrics until the sun came up.
Right.
And it just, and he was terrified, of getting those lyrics written, and he does say that Bon helped me. He definitely was there.
Yeah, and think of this too. Absolutely fascinating. But think of this: the whole album was recorded in 3 weeks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep.
That Back in Black, which is one of the top 10 albums in the history of music.
Oh yeah.
3 weeks is nothing.
Oh, I know, and I love that about them because they don't. I think Angus said they don't like to spend more than 6 weeks on an album at all.
Yeah,
that's their top is 6 weeks. If it's not done in 6 weeks, then it's done.
Yeah, it was a stream of consciousness. It was just wow, unbelievable. Well, the new book, AC/DC FAQ, all that's left to know about the world's true rock and roll band. AC/DC. SusanMasino.com is the website. And I'm going to link a lot of your links to my sites and social media. And there's an interview I did that I have on YouTube, which was my first TV interview with Angus and Brian. Maybe you could link that on your website. I think you'd like to see that.
Oh, yeah, I'd love that.
Yeah, it's on my YouTube channel. Just put that, the Allan Handelman Show with Angus Young and Brian Johnson. And what can I say? I'm proud of you. You're doing some good stuff. Maybe, I know I will be at least at one of the shows when they come. And as soon as we know where they're going to be, we're going to announce it. Susan, it was great having you on the program. Is there anything about the book that you'd like to get out before we end it? Is there something you didn't say?
I'd like to give a shout-out to Chad Smith from the Red Hot Chili Peppers,
yeah,
who wrote the foreword for me. He's a huge AC/DC fan, and I think he did a great job. I just absolutely love what he wrote, and he really captured the love that everybody has for the band, because I don't think that, when you're a fan, you're a fan for life. And I want to thank AC/DC for giving us so much joy and such great music over the years. And I'm so proud of them, of continuing on and doing what they do. And I look forward every day to seeing, more dates being added, and just send them a lot of love and support, and especially to Malcolm.
Wonderful. And you're right. All those years of that happiness, that feel-good feeling that I can't put into words other than goosebumps when you hear AC/DC. Yeah, they gave me lots of pleasure over the years, and they're going to continue. Well, Susan, we're going to turn it up. It was great having you back on the Allan Handelman Show.
Oh, thank you, Allan. It was wonderful to be on again.